to our online learning series. And this week, week 12, we are going to talk about stress, adjustment, and health differences in relation to personality theories. Alright, as mentioned just now, this chapter focuses on the part of human personality related to stress, physical adjustment, and health. This chapter is closely aligned to your textbook on page 399. So let's look at some learning outcomes for this chapter. I'm going to differentiate between disease-prone personalities and self-healing personalities and discuss or revisit Zuckerman's sensation-seeking subscales as it relates to overall health. I'm going to compare and contrast several personality disorders and also outline the conclusions of the famous Termites study. And lastly, to explain the concept of salutogenesis. Stay tuned. So are there such things as disease-prone personalities? This chapter is very relevant to the health crisis we are all facing. And the important question that comes to mind is who becomes sick, rather than why do people become sick. The idea that your mind affects your body is the focus of an area we call, if you refer to your textbook, psychosomatic medicine. Psycho meaning the mind, soma meaning the body. How does the mind affects the body? Now, when we talk about health behaviors, we talk about what activities, what actions that you do to increase your risk for certain diseases. Do people with particular personality traits take more health risks? Research has shown that people who are rebellious, aggressive, have lower self-esteem, and impulsive are more likely to smoke or abuse alcohol. Why? Perhaps because they use these substances to help in regulating their emotions because of poor emotional regulation. How do they regulate their emotions? Through the stimulating or sedative effects of these drugs. And that's why during this time of great COVID-19 anxiety, some people are turning to alcohol, according to some news reports. On the other hand, those who are more conscientious have a greater likelihood of putting themselves in healthy situations or engage in more healthy behaviors. Remember a couple of chapters ago, we did a personality inventory to see to what extent we are sensation seekers? Well, convicted drivers score higher in Eisen's psychoticism scale and also high sensation seeking. Now, if you recall, there are 4 aspects of sensation seeking, right? One of it is thrill or adventure seeking, experience seeking, disinhibition, and boredom susceptibility. Right? How do you remember that? DEBT. People who are high in sensation seeking may run into a lot of debt. So D for disinhibition. That's one factor. E for experience seeking, B for boredom susceptibility, and T for thrill seeking. Well, if you look at this very short version of the sensation seeking scale, you can probably tell, right, which one is linked to which of the 4 aspects of Zuckerman's sensation seeking. Well, we're going to focus on this aspect, the thrill and adventure seeking aspect, because this is highly related to health behaviors that are related to higher risk taking. And higher risk taking means higher chance of you dying prematurely, right? So those with high subscale scores of thrill and adventure seeking usually will correlate with another concept by Farley. And this is what we call the Farley's type T theory, because T stands for thrill. Now, these people biologically have a internal arousal deficit. This internal arousal deficit explains their psychobiological need for stimulation. So there's too little, deficit means there's too little stimulation in their certain parts of their brain, and therefore they seek out for more stimulation outside. For example, by climbing on a string that's suspended across two buildings, and that gives these people a lot of thrill, a lot of excitement. So this is how Farley described thrill seekers, those who crave variety, those who crave novelty, intensity, and risk. And these are the people who long for exciting, meaningful challenges. Some enjoy the physical sensations that come from being scared silly. Others like the idea that they are pushing themselves to the extreme. Like people who go out, despite the MCO, they are risking not just their health, but risking getting caught by the police or the army. But they like that. They like to go and test the waters because they are out to get more excitement, and sitting in the house cooped up under the four walls is definitely not very good for people with high type T or thrill-seeking behaviors. Why is it that some people feel more overwhelmed with sickness? There are obvious individual differences in terms of how we actually cope with stress. Now, some people respond to stress by entering the sick role, society's expectation of how you should behave when you are not healthy. Some are very sensitive to little tiny symptoms, and they seek out opinions from doctors, stay at home and skip classes, or they have mood swings, lie in bed all day, or constantly popping all kinds of medicine or pills. Now, when we were little kids, we might have been rewarded when we were so-called playing the sick role. When we play out the sick role, we get sympathy from our mommy, or we get to skip school. So some people feel the pain when there are no organic or biological explanations for the pain. High levels of neuroticism, for example, makes you more likely to actually feel pain. So playing the sick role is definitely rewarding. It's a form of escapism. So there are wide individual differences. Some people tend to express their sickness more often, right? They feel horrible, they will complain, they will worry a lot. And some people, although they undergo a lot of pain, but they don't express it. They think that it's just part and parcel of normal life. So different people, different individuals, depending on their levels of neuroticism, actually will be more susceptible to the expression of illness. Now, from the cognitive behavioral aspect, we move on to the interactionist aspect. Now, most diseases are manifestations of a combination of two factors, one biological and the other environmental. When we speak of a diathesis, we talk about the predisposition of the body to a disease or disorder. Now let's take depression as an example. Now this Diathesis-Stress model would suggest that there is a pre-existing vulnerability or diathesis that is present among people who later develop major depressive disorder. But depression may not manifest unless it is also elicited from the environment. There are external stresses. Now remember, P times E, right? P being dispositional factors, personal factors, interacting with environmental stresses or pressures. So in this case, we can also use P times E. P being predisposition, interacting with environment. So personal factors or predispositions, genetic vulnerability, interacting with the environment. So in addition to genetic vulnerability, a stressful life event must occur in order to trigger the depression, such as someone passing away from COVID-19, losing a job, or another major negative life event. So neither element alone, right, the diathesis by itself, or the stressful event is sufficient to trigger depression. Right? Both are important. Right? They must occur together. Something bad or stressful must happen to a person who has a vulnerability or sensitivity to depression. And this applies to physical issues as well. For example, I mentioned before, my father has been suffering from diabetes for the past 40 over years. So I, as a son, has a biological predisposition, right? I have maybe the bad genes that may lead me to having diabetes as well. But touch wood, currently I do not have diabetes because I'm concerned about my health. I'm concerned about sleeping sufficient hours. So if and unless I am not bothered, so I do have the predisposition, I've got bad genes, or what we call diabetic genes, and let's say I sit down, I don't exercise, I drink lots of sweet stuff, I'm full of stresses every day. So all these different environmental factors together with my unlucky genes that I've inherited from my dad, then perhaps one day I'll be more susceptible to having diabetes. So both personal factors that are due to genetic predisposition interacting with unhealthy behaviors, which are environmental external factors, combined lead to some disorders or diseases. The manifestation of personality disorders also due to a variety of different interacting factors. This is another example of the interactionist perspective. We have obvious genetic vulnerability in personality disorders. It could be due to childhood trauma, learning dysfunctional ways of behaving from others, or maybe relationship issues, all contributing to adult pervasive and long-standing patterns of behavior that lead to dysfunction and distress. Now, from a textbook, can you identify what would be the disorder that is characterized by such serious problems as impulsivity, self-destructive behavior, fragile self-identity, and stormy relationships? I'll give you a clue. All right, it's somewhere in cluster B. Right, when we talk about personality disorders, you learn all this in introduction. You've learned a little bit in Introduction to Psychology, but in Year 3 class on Abnormal Psychology, you will know that there are 3 clusters. Right? There's Cluster A, personality disorders, Cluster B, personality disorders, and Cluster C, personality disorders. Now, each of these clusters have got some similarities and there's some overlap. For example, if you look at Cluster A, paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal, they have some characteristics that are similar to schizophrenia. These are the odd and eccentric type. In Cluster B, the dramatic type, you have antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder, the dramatic type. And then in Cluster C, you have those disorders that have got anxiety as a common denominator, right? Avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Let me ask you a few questions. Does your work improve when it gets closer to the deadline? Have you been told that you eat too fast? Do you enjoy a good competition? Do you get angry when waiting in a long line at the grocery store, especially during the movement control order period? Do you refuse to feel tired? You want to do more work in less time. All right? So in other words, we have several characteristics of type A personality, right? And they all begin with H. Those who are very hardworking, those who are constantly in a hurry, right? Or hasty, and those who have high levels of hostility. Now, it is this hostility that is related to inflammation, as indicated by higher levels of white blood cells, right? So inflammation, as you know, is related not just to heart disease, but Alzheimer's disease, related to all sorts of issues, all sorts of health issues. So type A behavior pattern, right, can be found in some people who we can say are very confrontational, competitive, confrontational. They could be categorized as those in the choleric quadrant, if you look at Eysenck's theory. Right? It's characterized by someone with a tense, competitive style that is especially likely to be associated with heart disease. Coronary means having to do with your cardiovascular system. Now, among all the H, hostility is the one, or what we call hostile struggle is the one that is very harmful to health. So if you have some characteristics of type A personality, like you're very hardworking, highly competitive, that's fine. But just make sure that your levels of hostility are within control. Okay, so it's important again that we look at specific facets rather than the syndrome as a whole. Type A is a syndrome of a collection of different characteristics. In summary, it is okay to strive to achieve big goals and even be a workaholic, but don't get frustrated with everyday setbacks and inconveniences. Right? Don't get angry and frustrated when you can't accomplish everything that you have set out for. So again, when we look at type A and type B, we're not talking about categories. We're not talking about distinct divisions between some people are type A, some people are type B, right? That would look something like that if it's mostly categorical. No, we are not interested in that. When we talk about type A and type B, this is a common mistake, so I want to clarify a little bit. Types A and B are not really types at all, and do not refer to categories of people. Rather, type A refers to a normal distribution. Right, can you see here? A normal distribution of people. Okay, can you see the curve there? At one end, you have people with more type A behaviors. At the other end, people with very few type A behaviors, which we call the type B personality type. So it's similar to Bam's dimensions of masculinity and femininity that you did in the Padlet gender test. Right? So again, as in extroversion, introversion, and some authors are saying extroversion and introversion is not distinct types. We can have varying levels of extroversion and introversion in one person. So the conclusion is, if you want to know how to avoid a heart attack, type A stands for attack, A stands for the behavioral characteristics that I mentioned just now: hastiness, or always in a hurry, hardworking, highly competitive, and hostility. So nothing wrong with being competitive, nothing very wrong with, you know, having a good sense of time urgency. This is fine, okay? But the problem is the one that leads to higher levels of central nervous system, specifically sympathetic nervous system arousal, is the hostility and aggressive facet of the type A personality. Right? So it is good to express your feelings. It's fine if you do one thing at a time rather than multitask. It's good to have some time out to relax. Yes, but it's also fine to be competitive. It's fine to be punctual and have a sense of time urgency. It's just that this aspect of type A personality is a dangerous one that you want to control, right? Don't, burst out in anger and aggression, whether online or offline, right? Remember how to express your feelings in the proper way, right? Without raising your blood pressure. When you raise your blood pressure, there's more inflammation that will happen eventually, and then you will end up with coronary heart disease, which puts you at a greater risk of also dying from COVID-19. Remember during the Insta Live show last week, somebody asked about Caspi's lifespan approach. Right? And we know that the longitudinal studies and the lifespan approach is important because we are, interested in the long-term effects of certain characteristics in people. And there was such a study called the human termite study. We call it the termite study because the one who founded it was Terman. And Terman was a very famous personality who was influential in the development of IQ tests, the Stanford Binet test, right? So in Terman's study, which started from 1921, remember 1921 was after the last pandemic, worldwide pandemic that happened in 1920. Now we are having another one after 100 years. Well, in 1921, so he started looking for people with IQ above 135, so pretty smart people. And his collection of 856 males and 672 females were followed for a long period of time. Now this Terman study is still in progress up to today. Our textbook author, Friedman, is taking over the place of Terman in analyzing the results of this study, which is currently almost 100 years. So this big and famous study provides us with insight into various aspects of personality that's related to longevity. So are there certain personality traits or facets that predict long life? And I'm sure all of you will be interested in how to ensure that you survive for a longer period of time, right? So let's look at the results of this human termites study. All right, the first super trait we're going to look at is conscientiousness. If you look at page 414, another word for conscientiousness is social dependability, right? So conscientious children in primary school, for example, end up smoking less and drinking less alcohol when they are adults, fully 40 years later, right? The conscientious teenagers at age 17 also predict refraining from engaging in legal and illegal drug use many years later. So those low on conscientiousness in adolescence are more likely to get addicted in young adulthood to drugs of all sorts. Okay. Those who are more conscientious definitely are more likely to follow doctors' orders and adhere to the treatment plans that doctors recommend. Those who are more conscientious will probably wash their hands more often during this time of COVID-19 health crisis. Right? They're more likely to be more aware of what they touch and to control themselves so they don't touch their eyes, their nose, and their mouth unless they wash their hands very carefully. Now, these are characteristics of conscientious people. And conscientious students also tend to check their work. Right? If you remember doing the DISC, those who are high in C will be checking and rechecking to be very careful, cautious, and they correct all their mistakes before submitting assignments, we assume. So children who are more conscientious actually live longer according to the Termite study. Right? They live significantly longer than those who are not conscientious. 30% less likely to die in any given year, less likely to suffer from early death or injury. So the more conscientious you are, the more you're careful when you're driving, for example, and less likely to engage in all the different types of substance use. Okay? So in summary, to live longer, the strategy to improve your long life is to be more conscientious, right? It's also important to be truthful, to be prudent, and also to be free from vanity, because these characteristics, according to the textbook, also predict longer lives. So it's important to learn how to be more conscientious. Many theories emphasize the importance of psychosocial factors and health. Well, you might think that people who are more sociable will live a longer life. However, in the human termite study, they found that there is no link at all between sociability and longevity. So whether you're popular or you like playing with other people did not predict or will not predict longevity. In fact, those who were less sociable people like scientists who are constantly in their labs, or people who do not like to mix around so much with others, don't go partying, these are the people who actually live longer, right? Now, why do you think that sociability is not linked with longevity? Well, for one, as you see here, people who are more sociable end up going for lots of parties, drinking alcohol as they chit chat along during the weekend. So these are some of the risk factors, right? Because if you are drinking too much of alcohol, you'll be more likely to suffer from not just heart disease and liver issues and all kinds of other issues as well. It could be involved in drunk driving and get yourself knocked down in a car accident. So we know that people who are too sociable, spend so much time partying, actually have got lesser chance of living a longer life. Those who are going against the movement control order, they're going out chit-chatting with their neighbors, going to places that are crowded for no good reason, they are actually at higher risk of getting COVID-19, correct? Rather than those who are cooped up in their rooms, sitting down, doing their work quietly or watching Netflix. So if you go out and mix around with more people, you are exposed to more germs, right? And more chances of engaging in risky behaviors like drinking alcohol or taking drugs. Or you might also think that people who are cheerful, those who are more optimistic and humorous, live longer. Wrong. Being cheerful is good during stressful periods. Yes, we all know that, like quarantine or the movement control order. But being overly optimistic may mean being careless and carefree, which can be dangerous. I'm young and healthy. I don't need to be afraid of COVID-19. It won't affect me badly. What? I'll just recover in 14 days. So even when we say happier people are more healthy, it is because of other factors, other third variables, which may affect one's psychological health and physical health at the same time, right? So the conclusion from the termite study found that children who were more cheerful actually died sooner. Right? They grew up to be more likely to smoke, to drink, and to take risks. Same like those who are extremely sociable. So cheerfulness can be good in times like this when we are cooped up in the house, but can be very harmful because being cheerful makes us more careless rather than careful, more carefree rather than more conscientious. What about the stress termites that had to go through parental divorce? Right? If you read in a textbook, the relationship between divorce and longevity is a bit complicated. Although we know that parental divorce during childhood remains an important predictor of premature mortality, means dying younger. It has some additional consequences also during adulthood. But if we look closely, there are some important factors to take into consideration, right? So boys of divorced parents actually have more overt behavior and adjustment problems compared to the girls. And also, children whose parents divorced before the kids were 21 years old, or before they were, when they were very young, were more likely to die sooner and have their own marriages end up in divorce. Right? But if, let's say, the parents divorced when the kids were over 21, right? So that impact will be less compared to if little kids experience divorce when they are young, because when kids experience divorce when they are young, they might think that they are the cause of their parents' divorce. This is could be one of the factors. There are many other factors, right? And there are, just to be clear, there are people from divorced parents who actually are able to build resilience, right? They are able to succeed in life despite having gone through a lot of difficulties in their childhood. Right? So we cannot say that every child of divorced parents or separated parents will end up being someone who has all the serious psychological disorders. So we cannot make an overgeneralized conclusion. So as we know, the divorce of parents are more significant than the death of a parent in predicting life difficulties. In summary, the human termite study came up with a lot of surprising discoveries that we need to take note of. One thing we can conclude is in terms of mental health, it is important that we develop important characteristics such as dependability, right? Trust, and ensure that we don't become too impulsive. Right? So reducing impulsivity is important if you want to live a longer life. Right? So overall, all these comes under what we call ego strength. Ego strength, in other words, your mental stability can predict lower risk of early mortality. So studies have shown that males who experience mental health problems, those who experience many mental health problems, is because of low dependability, low trust, and high impulsivity, right? Or difficulties in adjustment. In adjustment, for example, now, right, there's a lot of people are having anxiety issues, are trying to adjust to life 24 hours sitting at home, working from home and all that. It's quite a big adjustment, right? But the more challenges you have in terms of adjusting to changes, the increased risk for early mortality. So let us just take things one day at a time and try to build resilience and build our ego strength. You want to learn more, you can read this book called The Longevity Project by Howard Friedman, who is also our textbook author, who is actually continuing the study by Terman. So then, what differentiates between the self-healing personality and the disease-prone personality? So these, in short, are the three characteristics that are related to self-healing, right? Which is, number one, control. People do not feel powerless in the face of external challenges. Right? As you know, people all over the world right now feel powerless in the face of COVID-19. But those who feel a sense of control, I can control the situation because I know how to take care of myself. I wash my hands for at least 20 seconds every time I touch things that have been touched by other people. So feeling a sense of control will help, right? If you feel that overwhelmed, you feel that everything is beyond your control, then it's more likely that you would get sick. Okay. The next C is commitment. To feel committed to something more important than yourself, right? To have a meaning, a life with meaning, a purpose-driven life. Right? When you're committed to something, for example, you're at home right now, but you have a commitment to do well in your studies, a commitment to broaden your knowledge, a commitment to your family members, to be in contact with those that you haven't been in contact with. To be committed to long-term goals also helps in so-called making you feel better for one, but also to make you more resilient in the face of the crisis that we are going through. The third aspect is challenge, right? To respond to life with excitement and energy. It's very difficult, right, during these times. But to look at issues, to look at so-called problems, not as problems and not as devastating curses or bad karma, but to take it as challenge, right? The more difficult the task is, the better. The more situations we have to face, the more I can develop patience, I can develop other ideals, right, of altruism, of being committed to people that I love, So control, commitment, the principles and ideals greater than self, and looking at issues and problems as challenges rather than catastrophes will be better. But having said that, remember, as we mentioned just now in a human termite study, that just being happy-go-lucky, right, is not healthy, right? So these three characteristics were a part of Viktor Frankl's life. You read on page 419, right? He was an inmate in a Nazi concentration camp, but he had dignity, right? He had a sense of commitment, and that's why he lived through all the atrocities of the Nazi aggression. Instead of looking at the shallow aspects and making it sound so simple, is there a one type of personality that is going to ensure long life and resilience and health? No. Okay, if you read the textbook, you will see there are two different types of self-healing personalities, right? The active, healthy personality, as well as the relaxed, healthy personality. Now, the active, healthy personality are those who function best in somewhat stressful environments. Those I mentioned just now, who perform their best during last-minute intensive studies and all that, right? They function best in somewhat stressful environment. And these people happen to be very outgoing and spontaneous. They have a zest for life. They are very zealous. On the other hand, there are people who are more relaxed. They function best only in an environment where there is low stress. Right? They're kind of calm and philosophical. In other words, they are responsive and relaxed. So if you look at these two types of personality, you notice that there are differences. We cannot just group people into one box and say, these are the people that are going to have long lives, and another box of people who are going to have shorter lives. No, right? There is an interactionist effect when we are talking about self-healing personalities as well. But it's important to note that you can either be those who are zealous, have a zest for life, or those who are responsive or relaxed. Right? So different kind of exercises, different kind of strategies. For example, yoga might be good for some people. But for some others, they have to do Muay Thai, they have to do other types of exercise to keep themselves healthy and go to the gym. So we cannot just give one recommendation for everybody, because we all have individual differences. We are all different people, and different people cope with stress differently, right? So go through the textbook and look at all the other aspects of self-healing personalities. What about those who are disease prone? Look at page 423. You will see a list, a checklist of some characteristics of those non-verbal cues that are usually associated with disease prone personality. Now, and what are some of these characteristics? Those who tend to be disease prone actually have uneven and accelerating speech, constantly trying to interrupt others in the middle of conversations, right? Loud voice with explosive words, too quick to answer, constantly sighing, stuttering, or using all those hesitations. Clenched fists, clenched teeth, touching, scratching, picking one's body constantly. I read the study saying that on average, a normal person touches different parts of his face at least 23 times an hour. Not so good during this COVID-19 season, but constantly picking at your body, scratching, rubbing your eyes, these are not good signs, and they are more disease prone. Those who have closed body positions of arms and legs when sitting down, right? Fidgeting, shifting, tapping, drumming the fingers, like this, okay? Shifty-eyed, downcast gaze, facial grimaces of anxiety and anger, vocal or body gestures of impatience and intolerance. And these are signs of hostility, right? Over-control, unexpressiveness, looks repressed or too calm. That is also a problem. So in other words, they have also found out in the self-understanding box that those non-verbal cues or body language associated with self-healing personality, you can see that they are mostly the opposite of those that are related to disease-prone personality. Those with self-healing personality have calm, well-modulated and even speech, symmetrical hand gestures directed away from your body, right? Natural smiles, natural enthusiasm, open, relaxed body positions when sitting down, good mutual gaze, good eye contact with others, smooth body movements, and they seem charismatic and optimistic, and not overly optimistic though. Right? So go through that checklist on page 423 and see, do you have mostly checks on the disease-prone personality portion or the self-healing personality portion? Finally, let's look at the existential aspects of self-healing. So the key to health and well-being is summed up by one word, and the word is coherence. And the belief that the world is comprehensible, manageable, and meaningful. So during this time, a lot of people feel anxious because they are unable to comprehend, right? Not many people know exactly what is this virus doing to us? How come certain peoples are more susceptible to COVID-19, right? So to understand what's going on and to be able to predict, to be able to know exactly the manifestation of this current disease that we are currently fighting is very important, because when we don't comprehend, when we don't understand, we feel very anxious. Number two, is it manageable? Are we able, from all the lockdowns, and then manage to contain this disease? If we feel that it's getting out of hand, it's spreading so fast, and people are dying, and the manageability goes down, right? So when we feel that we cannot manage something, when we cannot comprehend something, and worst of all, we find there's no meaning, right? A lot of us may be having existential crisis. And what's the meaning of working so hard? Why do I need to slog day in and day out if people are just going to get sick and die, right? So by having comprehension, a sense of manageability, and finding meaning even in suffering is the key to a long and healthy life. Now this is grouped under Antonovsky's concept of salutogenesis, which is a summary of how people can stay healthy. Now if you look down here, essentially an interaction of various theories, right? Thriving by Carver, self-efficacy by Bandura, empathy, attachment, coping, reasonableness, locus of control, specifically internal locus of control, having a philosophical sense of humor, having inner strength, a sense of hardiness, gratitude. Gratitude is something that sometimes we do not pay attention to. I always recommend to students, right, before we sleep at night, think of 3 things that you're grateful for, right? Even though we are all suffering and all cooped up in our rooms, but can we think of 3 positive things that happened today? That's my challenge for you. Learn optimism by Seligman instead of learn helplessness, right? Learn hopefulness instead of learn helplessness. Social capital, empowerment, having resilience, right? Finding meaning even in suffering, a will to meaning, which is related to the therapy method called logotherapy. Flourishing, having a sense of connectedness, right? Social and emotional intelligence, and go read a book by Goldman, right? Or a sense of flow, another very popular book by Csikszentmihalyi, right? So all these concepts are more or less a positive psychology concepts that have been brought forward and put under one umbrella. And one umbrella is summed up by that one overarching concept we call salutogenesis, which is basically your assets for good health, your asset for positive well-being. So go through this list, and these are not uncommon words. We have recovered some of these aspects in different chapters throughout this personality class. Okay, so this is key. It's not just one thing. It's not just having good genes, remember, that is going to guarantee you long life. It's a whole collection of physical as well as psychological, social, cultural, environmental factors that come together to contribute to a life full of passion, a life full of purpose, and a life worth living. Thank you very much. All right, as mentioned just now, this chapter focuses on the part of human personality related to stress, physical adjustment, and health.